Good afternoon, everyone, and a warm welcome to today's special event celebrating the everyday Marie-José Van Hee's architecture in dialogue with Aalto. My name is Pilvi Kalhama. I'm a director of the Architecture and Design Museum Helsinki, and it's my great pleasure to have you all with us here, whether you are joining from near or far. Today, we celebrate the remarkable life work of Marie-José Van Hee, a Belgian architect whose thoughtful, poetic approach to architecture has touched many people and many places. This event is brought to you in our collaboration with the Alvar Aalto Foundation and Aalto Museum Center in Jyväskylä, and we are delighted to share this moment with you. Marie-José Van Hee's architecture invites us to slow down and notice the beauty in the everyday. Her work, much like that of Alvar, Aino and Elissa Aalto, is rooted in care for materials, for the passage of time, and above all, for the people who inhabit the spaces she creates. You could call it as an architecture of quiet strength, where tradition is not frozen in time, but reimagined for the present and the future. In 2024, Van Hee became the 15th recipient of the prestigious Alvar Aalto Medal, and notably the very first woman ever to receive this honor. Therefore, this milestone is not only a celebration of her individual achievements, but also a sign of the evolving, more inclusive future of the field. The medal itself was designed by Alvar Aalto and is awarded to a living person who has made a significant contribution to the field of creative architecture. We are also proud to celebrate her work through the exhibition that opened earlier this year here at the Architecture and Design Museum Helsinki, featuring a beautiful life-size model of one of her designs. If you haven't yet visited the exhibition, you still have a few days as it's closing this Sunday, but don't worry, the exhibition will tour and reopen in a bit adjusted form at the Aalto Museum Center in Jyväskylä on September 26th. Then, few words about today's program. It brings together two wonderful speakers who will reflect on the resonances between Van Hee's work and that of Alvar, Aino and Elissa Aalto. First, we'll hear from Sam de Vocht, architect, teacher and curator who has worked closely with Marie-José Van Hee. Then we'll welcome Dr. Sophia Narti, assistant professor of architecture at the University of Cambridge, who has studied Alvar, Aino and Elissa Aalto's work. So we are truly having a super interesting afternoon here today. And then before we begin, just a few practical notes. The event will last 75 minutes in total, so very convenient for an online event. And that means that each speaker will have 25 minutes, followed by a 15-minute Q&A session, moderated by my colleague, Hanna Kapanen, who works as the curator of learning here at the museum. You can find the schedule in the webinar chat. You are warmly encouraged to send in your questions at any time using the Q&A function. And for those who would like to revisit today's talks or share them with others, the event is being recorded and will be available on our website for the next 2 weeks. You'll find the link in the chat as well. To both of our speakers and to all of you in the audience, thank you for being here. It's a true joy to share this event and these interesting topics with you. And now it is my pleasure to hand the floor over to our moderator, Hanna, who will introduce the speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Pilvi, for your wonderful opening words, and a warm welcome from my part also to everyone. It's my great pleasure to introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is architect, teacher and curator Sam de Vocht. who has worked closely with Marie-José Van Hee since 2006. Sam will introduce himself more closely and contextualize his practice as part of your talk. It's a pleasure to hand the word over to you, Sam. Welcome.
Thank you, Hanna. Let's see if I can go into full screen mode. Thank you, Hanna. Thank you also to all the teams for the combined and generous invitation for today's talk. Hello, everyone in the digital room. My name is Sam de Vocht. I'm a long-standing collaborator of architect Marie-José Van Hee, who is the protagonist of my talk in the next 25 minutes. Our journey goes way back. I graduated as an architect under her mentorship in 2004, then went on to study urban environment sustainability, after which our routes crossed again, and so I started working in her office. In 2015, I started tutoring in the Interiors Building Cities graduation studio at the TU Delft, where our students learn by doing, by drawing and by constructing large-scale models. Last year, I became a professor at the University of Antwerp, where together with a team of colleagues, we initiate first-year students into the design process, or in Dutch, ontwerpen. In this talk, I'll touch on themes that I want to share with you specifically, architecture students, the focal audience of this afternoon, and I want to explain to you, and in the process perhaps to myself, that design is personal. Look for significant spatial experiences you have had and how they could be translated in what you draw or make. Also, that design is complex and layered. Looking at the oeuvre of an architect like Van Hee, built over a period of 50 years, involving changing values, growing knowledge, and new insights. Also, keep in mind that design is about change. Design is transformative. On this photo in the early 70s, you can see Marie-José, third from the left, as one of the few women in the class. Nowadays, more than half of the student body in my class is female. With this talk, I'd like to activate your imagination, as Marie-José has sparked mine in the sensing the everyday otherwise. I'd like to ask you to note down or sketch things that speak to you during the talk, and it would be great if you can share these with me at the end. You could say that I was Marie-José's student for more than 20 years, given that most of what we learn happens informally at dinner or at an outside garden party, in a relatively small team of colleagues, and importantly for architects, on the construction site. Now, who is Marie-José Van Hee? My first reaction would be that she's the only one who can respond to that question. When you would ask me, though, I'd say that she's an architect's architect, enigmatic, curious, with a lot of energy and a detonating sense of humor, searching for spatial answers with a pencil in her right hand, never a cardboard and cutter. For a good 30 years, only insiders and mostly abroad were aware of her work. Even now, after having received the Flanders Architecture Prize in 2023, the Alvar Aalto Medal in 2024, and the Belgian Architectural Excellence Award earlier this year, if you'd ask someone in the street in Ghent, Brussels, or Antwerp, all cities where she has worked, not many people would recognize her name. However, the chances are real that they have visited one of her designs, climbed the stairs of the Antwerp Fashion Museum, or walked underneath the asymmetrical roofscape of the Ghent Market Hall. Crossed the recently opened Ghent-Vera Bus Bridge with 4 traffic lanes and cyclist tracks on each end and underneath also along the quays, or the cyclist and pedestrian bridge in Deinze that is smaller, lighter, and opens for passing boats. Next to these larger projects, including public spaces and social housing, Marie-José is known for the more intimately scaled houses. Interesting enough, to her, the complexity of designing a large public project is the same as designing a house on a small urban plot. Over a period of 50 years, Marie-José drew a total of 400 projects, of which 150 were not realized. Of the 250 that were, only about half was renovation, the other one new. These times are gone now. Marie-José is silently leaving the architecture scene, and we are closing the office. A medical condition that left her unable to draw, now 3 years ago, demands her to focus on other things, to celebrate the everyday otherwise. Retrospection, introspection, looking to the future. There have been 2 large exhibitions, one in Antwerp 3 years ago, where we did engage in model making, bringing Marie-José's Ghent house to the premises of the Single Arts campus, invited by the Flanders Architecture Institute. We reconstructed a large part of her house, a Ghent house, on a scale 1:1, and with abstracting materialities. The planked concrete columns were represented by raw pine planks, and the signature green walls were built by recuperated cases from a previous exhibition. This illustration of the main space shows the degree of abstraction, with line drawings on a cotton textile. Next to it, a photo of the real space. We also left the confines of the exhibition room and showed work of artists whose work feels close to Marie-José's architecture. And we invited visitors to take a walk throughout the campus, as hiking has been Marie-José's favorite free time occupation. And the second exhibition, now on view here in Helsinki, where we varied on the 1:1 exercise with another key project that I'll come back to in a moment, the house in Zuidzande. This exhibition closes Sunday and will open soon in the Aalto 2 Museum Center in Jyväskylä. Also, there are publications on the work, such as the recently reissued version of the monograph More Home, More Garden and the A+U magazine, Japanese architecture magazine. For A+U, I wrote an essay titled Undrawing, where I illustrate and situate Marie-José in a broader architecture landscape and talk about essential themes in her work, illustrated mainly by the 2 featured exhibition projects I just mentioned. I also zoom in on how she collaborates with everyone who works with her, a body of people that I call her third hand. Each one of them has a different perspective and a different story. I will now share part of mine in the rework chapter of the talk I gave last August when Marie-José received the Alvar Aalto Medal. I'm aware we're now looking at a white page. I provide this so that you can project your thoughts. And we now start with the story. It's pouring rain on a summer evening in the late 1950s. In Bachte Maria Leerne, a small town about 15 kilometers outside Ghent, a young girl is camping in a white, damp plastic tent, picketed in an orchard between a greenhouse and a clothes drying line. She escapes the activity in her parents' house and sleeps out with one of her friends. About 60 years later, I'm sitting with Marie-José at the table of the main space in her Ghent house as she shares this story. 2 meters up, in one of the niches on top of the cupboards that line the front facade, I notice a framed black and white photograph showing a white cabin in the woods. I'd known about the photo before, but suddenly things fell into place. This camping experience must have considerably marked Marie-José, sparked her architecture imagination, arriving at an architecture that celebrates the threshold, linking the exterior to the interior and vice versa. It's difficult to keep an overview of the many design decisions within her rich and complex oeuvre, though there are recurring themes. I'd like to walk you through some aspects that could exemplify the essential or basic comfort and no-nonsense approach that characterizes the architecture of Marie-José Van Hee. Soon after she finishes her studies, amid the 1970s worldwide energy crisis, her first houses were light, freestanding constructions made of wood and steel. Having looked at the work of the Californian Green and Green brothers while still a student, she created several houses with tent-like roofs that the commissioners could help construct themselves. She says, "It was important that my father and brother, both steel workers, could build the house I designed for my parents." We notice that in her early work, the structure, the bones, remain visible, and we get a hint of Japanese traditional carpentry. 20 years later, she designs her own house in an urban context, and here we see a different materiality, though a similar design approach. Marie-José repeated the English brick bond of the neighboring workers' houses. It's the most basic wall composition possible, merely 20 centimeters thick, a lightweight construction if you compare it to present-day insulated wall compositions. On each end of the front facade, a niche, one narrow to the left to enter the kitchen, and one wider to the right, more representative. Large recycled bluestones are placed in front of the entrance doors. They protrude a bit and signal the space where visitors can say, "out of the rain." Marie-José smiles, saying that, quote unquote, "one is already inside when waiting at the door." The main space, paved with limestone blocks, sits flush with the street and functions as a semi-public drawing room, both in the historical sense of the word, withdrawing from public life, an entertainment room, and literally, as it is a space where Marie-José draws and undraws. And now I want to share a small intermezzo with you. I'll be reading some observations of Yvonne Farrell during her ceremonial address as president of the jury for the Aalto Medal. Marie-José Van Hee draws as if she is digging, plowing into the paper like an archaeologist with a trowel, trying to discover the hidden secrets of the use, of spatial relationships, of place, of movement, of light. The blank sheet for her is a place where she digs into her unconscious and conscious to find a synthesis for each new project. Her sketches express the interiority of imagination, which become possibilities, where she evaluates dimensions, checks relationships, mulls over ideas not fully formed, but needing expression to become a reality. A pencil sketch is thinking and understanding made visible. Marie-José is also a master at blurring the boundaries between buildings and their surroundings. She prefers to let walls speak through their materialization and texture. She prepares large surfaces. I imagine they are empty textile canvases for sun and wind to paint on. As a result, buildings are in dialogue with and eventually absorbed by their environment. Buildings become built environments. Here inside the Zuidsonderhuis, the sun haphazardly draws shadows onto the planked cupboards along the northern wall. Back in Ghent, glass reflections from the neighbor's window across the street interact with the drawing of the slender profile windows of Marie-José's house. The gallery at the back mediates the drawing room with the courtyard. It can be used on rainy days, extending the time one can live outdoors. Or it can be used to keep the vegetables fresh between seasons. Between the columns, she drew broad brick benches that soak up the heat and serve as basic daybeds to enjoy the warm summer evenings. Note also the slurry on the concrete columns. Applied with a big brush, it is as if the columns now carry the fingerprint of the house. A good room receives daylight from at least two directions, she says. It allows one to experience the passing of time and get a sense of orientation. She controls light and shadow, creates atmosphere. In her own house, one can clearly mark the difference between the cold light entering from the east versus the warm hues of the evening sun. Sun and moon meet in the same room. She often draws wooden panels, size no bigger than a painting canvas. These panels allow one to manipulate the light intensity or even reflect the light towards the interior. The fact that Marie-José always insisted on drawing the electricity plan herself in the later project stage exemplifies the importance of light in her architecture. You won't find any light specialist in her contact list. She adheres to the teachings of the Scandinavian masters in that she situates light fixtures close to windows to replicate the effect of natural daylight when the curtains are drawn at night. There are no curtains to undraw in her house, and at night the lamps in the drawing room turn the building into a lantern and dimly illuminate the narrow street, showing passers-by they're not alone. Someone is at home. Marie-José likes to design the lighting of a project as much as he likes to draw the landscaping around the projects. Her interest in gardens and landscaping started early on. Her graduation thesis was a treatise on gardens from the Middle Ages until Louis XIV. Her approach to architecture and landscape architecture shares a familiarity with the oeuvre of Mexican architect Luis Barragan, known for the houses that respond to the topography of the terrain in Los Jardines del Pedregal, and also the work of that of the female Chilean landscape designer Teresa Moller. Marie-José also admires the Greek architect Dimitris Pikionis for his interventions around the Acropolis and the adjacent Philopappou Hill in Athens. Her sensitivity to terrain's natural topography is intuitive and made explicit in the intricate designs she comes up when drawing natural stone floors. This project has popped up already a couple of times, is situated in Zuidsande, South Beach, 3 kilometers from the North Sea coast. I worked on it with Marie-José between 2007 and 2015. A Y-shaped floor footprint contains the main living area, divided in two by a sculptural chimney, which you see here. On the first floor, a large bedroom with shower, and on the second, another one for the children and a bathroom. The vertical circulation sits around a platform lift and culminates at a roof terrace where one can watch the container ships at high tide. When the windows are opened, the living space on the ground floor becomes an outdoor covered terrace. The floor is made according to the terrazzo procedure, but without the large pebbles. Only sand references the nearby North Sea beach one can walk on barefoot. You walk down into the garden 80 centimeters below by taking some concrete steps inspired by a visit to Roberto Burlo Marx's designs in Brazil. On the side stood an old farmhouse, which we could replace by the same volume. Marie-José chose to place it at the back of the side so that the rooms could face south and look into the garden this way. The design becomes context specific because it takes up the idea of a basement dug in only halfway, which has many benefits. Less earth digging, but importantly in the Netherlands to stay above the groundwater level. Marie-José insisted on keeping the old basement near the dike, remains well hidden in a greenbelt that protects the farmstead from the sometimes strong sea winds. The ruin refers to the house that once existed. And to finish this idea, Marie-José talks about placing a steel and glass construction on top, as if she would pitch a tent in the sand. The poetic act of salvaging the foundations of the old house is a reminder that we are part of a cycle, that we are here just for a while. Buildings and trees can easily survive us. Thus, we should respect and honor their memory, thank them for their protection and presence. Now we move again to Ghent for a closer look at the architect's house, central on the screen, over here. Parallel to the street, we find a large space you've seen on the photos earlier in the presentation. 2 entrances, 3 staircases, a kitchen, a shower room, above the kitchen, a library, above the shower room, a bedroom. Then another staircase going up to 2 bedrooms with each a shower room, with the staircase leading back to the main entrance. Like in Zuidsande, we can see a height difference but this time in verse. Entering the narrow kitchen, over here, entering the narrow kitchen to the left of the section, one goes down a few steps, following the existing topography of the plot. You can see that the kitchen and shower room, perpendicular to the street, sits 60 centimeters below the courtyard, over here. The courtyard then sits 20 centimeters higher than the street because, as Marie-José reveals, higher up one sits closer to the sun. Floor-to-ceiling carpentry lines a narrow passage. A repetition of equidistant vertical wooden mullions communicates a border between inside and outside, reminding us maybe of a paravent, a 19th century piece of furniture that, as the word suggests in French, protects a naked body from the draft when changing clothes. Paravent, contre le vent, protection against the wind. To Marie-José, windows are material. Glass forms a border between two climates, just like the textile of that tent. She places the shower room, somewhat sunken, next to the outdoor room and lines it with glass. This is an excellent example of what taking a shower inside out could be like, in the intimacy of the courtyard. When in the shower, a well-placed concrete column provides some privacy, and on cold winter days, without protective foliage, hot shower steam makes the windows opaque. This layered play of hide and seek, gentle covering and revealing, is a proper tribute to the Greek gods of love, Aphrodite, and her son Eros. The east-facing first floor shower of the Zuidsanddenhuis offers an almost outside experience in yet another way. The shower protrudes into the garden and resembles a covered terrace of the Palazzo Ducale in Mantua. Or one could say a glazed mashrabiyya, which is a projecting window we find in the Arabic world, on the upper floor of a building enclosed with carved wood latticework, used to catch wind and for passive cooling. On the northwestern side of this house, facing the North Sea and its strong winds, 4 apparently frameless windows pierce the concrete facade. A 5th one opens to the sky. These windows look like medieval embrasures by placing the glass cold against the concrete shell, using the least possible material to arrive at the best possible architectural detail. As we don't see the window frames, it looks like the wind could pass through the wall. I see it as Marie-José's tribute to the etymology of the word window, the Norse kvindauga, windoog, or wind eye. Back in Ghent, these windows, designed with her younger brother Johan, follow the same thinking. A broad wooden post stands in the middle, communicates with the concrete columns at the covered outdoor space. It also holds the system for opening and fixing the moving parts. As a result, the steel windows can become slender and elegant. When fully opened, they disappear. Single glass is the thinnest separation possible. Marie-José sets it in the steel frames with wooden beads, and the whole is intuitively covered with the same zinc emulsion that protects the steel. Single glass is the thinnest separation possible between inside and outside. Single glass assures a quality of light inside as close as possible to the light of her beloved outside. Single glass is the reason why the house will become a monument next February, only 30 years old. Marie-José wants to prevent an upgrade according to contemporary norms. To let rooms breathe, Marie-José avoids doors in the interior as much as possible. Doors can even become part of the wall. For many years, as you can see on this photo from 2008, she amusingly used painted wooden door leaves as tabletops, supported by 2 trestles and accommodated with simple wooden cafe chairs. Ad hoc furniture such as these chairs brought a semi-public character to the drawing room. Also inviting is the presence of an open fire in the corner. Since prehistory, fire has had the power to assemble people. We need it to warm ourselves and to cook our food. The smell of burnt wood when walking the city on a wintry night is to many a sign of human activity. At least it is to me, having grown up in the 80s and 90s. Fireplaces and chimneys have always taken an essential place in Marie-José Van Hee's oeuvre. The citizens of Ghent were granted one for celebrations, intricately worked into one of the concrete feet of the market hall, out of which the figure of an urban chimney rises. Marie-José is adamant and critical regarding rules and building regulations that result in hermetically sealed interiors. To her, the idea of building passive houses presents the opposite of outdoor living and contradicts the humanity that lies in opening a window for a gentle breeze on a warm day. In her house, only the roof and floor are insulated. The inside of that brick wall is lined with a 2-centimeter wood wool layer against which cupboards are placed. She contends that the still air inside the cupboards acts as insulation. Poetic license, you could say, but there's a truth to it. Even more, the wooden planks are insulating in that they break the cold radiation of the brick walls. In Zuidzande, to create as much space as possible within the set confines of the volume, we researched how to make the walls as thin as possible. The outer concrete shell, measuring 20 centimeters, was lined on the inside with 12 centimeters of wood wool and 3 centimeters of lime render. When Marie-José moved into her house, one of the first acts was to quote-unquote lift the mattress from the ground. She designed a bed for herself, an oak structure connected by cedar planks, onto which rather hard futons are placed. The beds are joined by a leather belt strapped around the middle feet, recalling while traveling in Southern Europe that she used a pair of socks to join the hostel bed to that of her partner. In Marie-José's bedroom, 2 steel bars traverse at 2-meter height, one on each side of the bed. A mosquito net is hung onto these bars, creating a textile room within a room. I imagine that in this compact space, Marie-José walked through her designs, abstract space, no materials yet, as if you walk in a forest and you don't know the names of the trees you walk past. I think again of the significance of the camping experience in her parents' yard, protected from the cold, wind and rain, in another white tent. Marie-José, like an alchemist who turns silver into gold, marries the moon with the sun. She practiced her light prescribing skill so that interiors could feel like exteriors, and the other way round. She devoted her life to architecture, aiming to realize, quote-unquote, just one good work is enough. And, because of her persistence, we can still today celebrate the everyday otherwise. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Sam, for your wonderful lecture. A quick reminder for our audience. Remember to write your questions using the Q&A function on the bottom of the screen. We will answer the questions after both of our lecturers, both Sam and our next lecturer, Sofia. And now I will welcome Sofia. Dr. Sophia Nivarti is an assistant professor of architecture at the University of Cambridge and a fellow of St. John's College, Cambridge. Raised in Jyväskylä, Finland, she trained as an architect at the University of Cambridge in the UK and the Yale School of Architecture in the USA. Dr. Nivarti's primary research specialism is the critical analysis of the architecture, urbanism, design, and thought of Finnish modernists Alvar, Aino and Elissa Aalto and their associates. Her other research interests lie in the histories and theories of modern and contemporary architecture, especially in Arctic and subarctic regions. You are most welcome, Sofia.
Thank you very much indeed. Let me share my screen and I hope this works okay. All right. I'm assuming that's all right. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Hanna, very much for the introduction. Thank you, above all, for the invitation to join. So special thanks to the Architecture and Design Museum Helsinki and the Alvar Aalto Foundation for organizing this event. As we've already noted, the frame for our event today is the Aalto Medal, and hence these reflections on two practices. First, the practice that gave its name to the award, and second, the practice that has most recently been awarded it. Of course, the point of the Aalto Medal is not to reward work that mimics the Aalto's portfolio, but instead to celebrate practices and practitioners who make meaningful contributions to architecture, each in ways of their own. So it's most certainly not about copying, of course not. That said, in the case of Marie-José Van Hee and her studio, there are very strong mutual affinities between her work and that of Alvar, Aino and Elissa Aalto. Many apparent similarities, overlaps, resonances, and echoes, meaning similar architectural gestures, you could say, and very similar atmospheric qualities. Certainly in an architectural sense, and possibly also in a cultural, ethical sense. So it seems that there's a shared spirit, if you will, that animates the work of both practices. The title of today's event, Celebrating the Everyday, makes an attempt to capture or to describe that shared spirit. You might think of this title as a thesis, which suggests that these are architectures of the everyday, rather than the extraordinary. These are architectures that are intimate rather than grandiose. They speak more to the overlooked than to the powerful. They're more about humbleness than pompousness. Simply put, these are exemplars of what we might call humane architecture. This conclusion is hardly new, particularly in the case of the Aaltos. And in fact, ever since the very first histories of the modern movement in architecture appeared in the 1940s, the Aaltos have been heralded as quote unquote humanizers of a much more rigid, rational, and systematic modernism. So the standard storyline is that the Aaltos softened modern architecture from something cold and mechanistic into something warm and humane. And of course, the classic example is the contrast between the cold tubular steel furniture associated with the Bauhaus and its offshoots and the plywood softness of Ardek. One was cold to the touch, the other warm. One was technologically oriented, the other crafted. One seemed bureaucratic, if not technocratic in character, whereas the other seemed ambiguously domestic and potentially even egalitarian. Hence the proliferation of labels that have been used to describe the work of the Aaltos in seminal works of architectural history. It's been called humane modernism, organic, soft, poetic, regional, romantic, empathetic modernism, and so on and so forth. The terms have varied in the course of the decades in different publications, but the message, you could say, has remained basically the same. In the 21st century, another term has entered architectural scholarship, which is care. You could say that in the case of the Aaltos, all of these previous terms seem to have converged into the notion of care. So what was once called humane modernism is now called an architecture of care. In many ways, this is a natural progression or evolution of the reputation that the Aaltos architecture already has and already has had for a long time in scholarship. So it's the same story that's being retold in an updated theoretical lexicon. Discourses on care are very topical in architecture today. Suffice to say that there are many different types of care. There are many different theorists and theories of care. Certainly far too many to summarize coherently in a mere few minutes. But the overarching sense is that virtually all of them seem applicable to the work of the Aaltos to an almost uncanny degree. And this is what explains the conspicuous kind of abundance, you could say, of all the references in contemporary architectural writing on care. The suggestion seems to be that theirs was an architecture of care before such a term even existed. And I want to briefly flick through some examples. Firstly, of course, there is care for people. So this might be the comfort that's provided by small architectural gestures to an inhabitant, effectively an empathy of details, if you will. You might think of the lampshade that conceals a naked bulb and its harshness from the human eye. You might think of the door handle in a hospital that prevents the doctor's sleeve from getting caught up in it. You might think of the baluster that has rails at different heights, the lower ones suited to the skill of small children and the higher ones to adults. Care for people, of course, doesn't only pertain to individuals, but also to human collectives. So this is also about the role that's played by architecture in building the welfare state as a political paradigm, for example, or in reinforcing social cohesion and community spirit. So here what's relevant is the architectural valorization of civic institutions, such as the school or the library or municipal offices. Of course, there's also care for the environment. This means care for organisms, living organisms, and ecosystems or ecologies at large. Increasingly, this also means care for more than human species, as they're now called, so the animals that we share the planet with. Relevant in this care context is the Aalto's predilection for using natural materials, most famously, of course, timber and brick, but also materials such as leather, jute, cork, reed, and even horsehair, famously in projects like the Finlandia Hall. Relevant too are the close connections that the Aaltos sought to create between interior and exterior spaces. The Aaltos themselves use the term forest dreaming to describe these types of efforts to mimetically or allegorically bring the forest inside. The most famous example is, of course, Villa Maire, where the dense timber supports of the grand stair that we see here and the columns in the living room evoke the feeling of being surrounded by trees. So together, forest dreaming, the use of natural materials, very smart solar patterns, natural ventilation, so on and so forth, are very easy to qualify as a proto-ecological ethic of care. Then there's also care for inanimate objects and things. This means care for plumbing pipes, for instance, or facade tiles or furniture. Efforts, effectively, to ward off the ill effects that time, use, and weathering bring upon them. This type of care is evident in the Aaltos, not just accepting, but even celebrating wear and tear as constituent ingredients in their architecture and design products. In contrast to the pristine cleanliness and razor-sharp perfection of many peers, it's fair to say that they reveled in construction error, in unevenness, and patina. Very famously, for example, at the Baker House in Cambridge, Massachusetts, they chose the ugliest and the lowest grade bricks available because their character was to the Aaltos much more delightful than machine-cut perfection. You might think of this as an architectural doctrine of grace, where you love materials for their own sake, you choose not to demand the impossible of them, but you instead accept the qualities that they come with. And this, in turn, is very easy to associate with a proto-sustainable ethic of material longevity and care. We could go on and on and on for days, if not weeks. With a portfolio as vast as that of the Aaltos, which comprises over 200 realized projects, hundreds more that were left unrealized, not to mention, of course, the Artek catalog, it would be very easy to drone on about these endlessly and to start detailing all the millions of ways in which discourses on care seem to fit the Aaltos work to a T. Similarly, in the name of that shared spirit, we could spend days, if not weeks, looking at the vast portfolio of Marie-José Van Hee, also as an architecture of care, going through examples of all the thoughtful details, material selections, kind of typological decisions that dovetail with definitions of a caring architecture. The work of both practices is easily qualified as a forerunner to or an exemplar of an empathetic, ecological, sustainable architecture. This is humane, to use a 20th century term, or an architecture of care, to use a 21st century term. What's not to like? Well, I think there is an uncomfortable slippage that is often embedded in the notion of care. And first, I want to issue a disclaimer, which is that care itself is hugely valuable. It's morally urgent. And indeed, care is perhaps something that we need more than ever before, given the political and climatic disasters of our time. Notions like planetary care or community care are valuable, urgent, they're very much necessary, no doubt about that. And the work that's being done by brilliant scholars on architectures of care is equally necessary. It's hugely interesting and it merits widespread appreciation and applause. However, I think unease arises from the fact that care, in the way that it's theorized today, certainly not always, but in many cases, is coupled with an uncritical belief in data analysis, or what you might call evidence-based design theory more broadly. All too easily, care starts to become something that is quantifiable. It's a researchable kind of system or mechanism. And scholars are increasingly concerned by this slippage, as is illustrated by this very recently published journal issue, which offers a nuanced critique of so-called quality settings in architecture. Well-intended efforts to promote various standards of care risk homogenizing the built environment. And some people even suggest that it risks delegitimizing architecture as a discipline at large. Meaning, of course, if architecture is reduced to a set of technical or social parameters, what's left for architects to do? When care is theorized or defined as the fulfillment of certain metrics, it starts to suggest that we can count or calculate our way to perfect equilibrium, so that we can somehow figure out scientifically what the correct parameters are for care, and our role as designers is simply to fulfill them. In other words, there's an implication of a certain protocol of standards of best practice. So we can empirically measure, for example, optimal ergonomics or thermal comfort, and all we have to do is follow the data to create a perfect architecture of care. This in turn fuels the assumption that this is what the Aaltos and Van Hee already did and are still doing, that they're exemplars of an architecture of care because they fulfill the correct metrics. Fields such as neuroaesthetics or environmental psychology are engaged in explaining and even retroactively justifying all the projects. So you could say that empirical research is kind of summoned as a historical witness to prove that the Aaltos conformed with evidence-based design protocols before such protocols even existed. I'll show some examples so that this hopefully makes more sense. We might think of the textural, the haptic, the material richness that we so fluently associate with all the interiors. Architectural historians have used terms like eclecticism, heterotopia, or collage to describe how the Aaltos were so able to mix together such a range of materials and textures. Today, neurological researchers use instead terms like atmospheric zoning. Atmospheric zoning is a recommended strategy for designing for neurodiversity because it helps label spaces, essentially, so that it signals different purposes and different hierarchies through architectural means. So the narrative is that the Aaltos intuited and they managed to follow protocols for neurodivergent design principles decades before they existed. Or to give another example, research in environmental psychology tells us that connections to nature help lower blood pressure. So what architectural historians and what the Aaltos themselves called forest dreaming is now increasingly being post-rationalized as, quote, nature-based architectural therapy or eco-empathy. And again, the narrative is that the Aaltos followed evidence-based guidelines before they existed. And these points are not entirely incorrect. In fact, they make a lot of sense. It's easy to see why the works of the Aaltos and of Van Hee are heralded as examples of evidence-based design. They do appear to conform with many of the conclusions or the quality settings that are set out by research on architectures of care. But crucially, I'd like to suggest that there's more to care in the Aalto portfolio, and similarly in the work of Van Hee, than conformity with evidence-based conclusions. Their beauty, their appeal, their cultural significance doesn't come from a total correspondence with data-driven guidelines for optimized comfort, optimized sustainability, or optimized functionality. And in fact, I would argue that it's the moments where their architecture transcends optimization or even defies and denies it that care is manifest in the most meaningful of ways. It's the unoptimal rather than the optimal that makes them so precious. We might think of the Biomio-tuberculosis Sanatorium. Evidence-based researchers have argued that this was a masterpiece because of how perfectly it matched the medico-scientific research of its time. So the building became a totalizing instrument of care, where everything from ventilation rates to patient walking patterns was optimized according to the science of its time. So the conclusion is it's an architecture of care because it hits all the correct metrics. But arguably, it's a masterpiece because it approached medical evidence selectively and creatively rather than slavishly. Of course, it took into account the pulmonary care protocols of its own time, but it also went beyond them. And crucially, it complemented them with aesthetic gusto and with play. Many of its most interesting design features are not based on science, but on intuitive experimentation and play, intuition, effectively. And these tend to be precisely the aspects that have helped the design last the test of time. The yellow of the floors, for example, was the result of experimentation rather than scientific color theory. And in fact, Aalto himself was reportedly upset by the final tone and tried to change it in vain. It's the yellow of these floors that have played a central role in fueling lasting affection for the building to this day, many, many decades after it stopped serving as a tuberculosis hospital. And of course, it now has a brilliant afterlife as a center of learning and knowledge, steered as it is by the Biomio Foundation. Or another example, light and sound. When it comes to visibility and acoustics, evidence-based metrics of care are very quick to tell us the correct parameters of optimal seeing and hearing. Again, the work of the Aaltos is referenced as an embodiment somehow of a perfectly calibrated illumination. There are subtle gradients of light that become darker in a bedroom, perhaps, to aid sleep, and then brighten in areas like reading zones or spaces for studying. That's the common storyline. But actually, the Aaltos insisted on quite radical gradients of light, including moments of real darkness, which are far from optimized. In fact, there's a sense of shelteredness, almost like an animal snuggling in a small nest. And the dark tends to work in dialogue, if you will, with a set of skylights or fully placed facades somewhere further beyond, creating a kind of dramaturgical dimension to these journeys in light. Similarly, Van Hee's modulation of light hardly fits any technical measures of optimal illumination. And in fact, it often contradicts and defies them. Light is lyricized, appreciated, even revered, and its beauty is magnified by moments of unoptimal light and darkness, which is precisely why it evokes such strong sensibilities. Or another example, spatial syntax, the proportions of space and how they relate to one another. Again, research-based evidence is keen to give us guidelines for ideal distances between spaces and people. These are things like recommended dimensions for rooms, optimal movement routes through buildings, and so on. And again, the work of the Aaltos is often cited as an illustration of purportedly optimal spaces. But in fact, it's where Aalto spaces become selectively unoptimal, spatially speaking, that they become more interesting and more humane. There are some spaces that feel slightly too vast in scale, and they therefore allow for a sense of awe-inspired reflection and civic gravitas. At other times, the space has become too small, almost too awkward, at least again in light of optimized metrics. And that's the whole point. They provide a sense of comfort. They allow the individual to hide behind a column, hide beneath a very low soffit, to take a moment for themselves. John Gamble very evocatively describes these gradients as degrees of retreat. Again, similarly, Van Hee's spaces also may appear too narrow, too jagged geometrically, or too inconvenient in light of evidence-based quality settings. The water closet in one house is an outhouse in the garden. In other projects, walls kink and bend to create ambiguity whose unoptimal nature in terms of movement or cleaning or furniture placement is precisely what makes them so poetic. There are many landings, there are turns, corners, columns, and gateways that make for memorable journeys rather than optimal circulation. To give a final example, there's also an insistence on archaic ritual. We might consider the presence of elements like fire pits or fountains and ponds in various Aalto projects. Even the Bymius Sanatorium, which was again heralded as the most technologically sophisticated medical instrument of its time, had a curiously vernacular fireplace in its patient lounge. Sometimes these elements aren't really even used in practice, as is the case with the fire pit in the Wolfsburg Cultural Center. But they're present nonetheless, and that's the point. Irrespective of a lack of use, the fire pit evokes associations of cooking by fire or soldering metal by hand. It's a really powerful statement in an atrium, as in this example, that's surrounded by state-of-the-art workshops and studios. Like little stones in your shoe, these ritual motifs remind you not to forget about cultural myth and folklore. Again, similar elements repeat in Van Hee's work. A fireplace is far from optimal if you're interested in evidence-based standards of thermal comfort or energy efficiency, but it speaks to humans in a way that automated temperature controls simply don't. All in all, gestures like these are actually kind of misfits when it comes to evidence-based quality settings for care. These are spaces that more often than not are unoptimal lighting-wise or acoustically or in terms of energy use or movement patterns. And I would argue that their disconformity with evidence-based protocols doesn't mean that they're not architectures of care, but in fact, this is why they're such brilliant architectures of care. They transcend data-driven understandings of care and therefore resonate at a much deeper level. I have to say as a slight aside that I suspect that much of the success of both practices in this regard has to do with anchoredness in drawing as the most fundamental working method. But this is a topic for a whole other lecture, if not a week-long seminar. So I digress, but it's impossible not to mention. I would even go as far as to suggest that there's an element of negative care in these architectures. Allow me to explain. What I mean is that most of the time, evidence-based paradigms of care are positively bent, as philosophers would say. So in other words, they're paradigms that seek for something better and something improved. So the questions involved are positive questions, like how can a design be perfected? How can we achieve more? More happiness, more satisfaction, more functionality, more sustainability, and so on and so forth. These types of questions contrast to what philosophers would call negative questions, which pertain to problems more than potential solutions. What went wrong? What is missing or what has already been lost? What or who needs protection? What needs to be hidden? And I certainly don't wish to misappropriate philosophy. Too many of us architects do this all the time. We're very guilty of misguidedly and kind of flippantly borrowing terms from fields we don't understand. But it is worth noting, I think, that traditions of negative questions or negative thinking have very esteemed pedigrees in philosophy. The Finns in the audience may be familiar with the work of pragmatist philosopher Sami Pihlström, the University of Helsinki. Negative thinking is not about lacking hope, presuming the worst, or surrendering to undesired outcomes, but it's about thinking in negative terms almost in a mathematical sense, thinking about absence rather than presence. Negative thinking is about asking not just what can be gained, but what can be lost. Not just who can win, but who potentially loses. Not just how to monumentalize the extraordinary, but how to guard the fragility of the everyday. Not what novelty can we invent, but what old are we obligated to protect? And not how to optimize, but how to appreciate imperfection. I find echoes of these negative questions and negative thinking in the work of the Aaltos and of Van Hee, and I maintain that this is their greatest contribution to discourses on care. And in fact, they've basically said as much themselves. We might consider the Aalto's own reflections on how, and this is a direct quote from Alvar Aalto, I quote, "True architecture exists only where the little human being stands in the center, in tragedy and in comedy, both." We could rephrase that to say that true architecture exists only when it asks both positive and negative questions. And as critics have pointed out, all too often evidence-based design focuses on positive questions only. Or let's consider Van Hee's evocative statement. And again, here I'm quoting her directly. She says, "I like good rooms. That's what interests me through all the ages. houses with good rooms, good dimensioned rooms with good light coming in and doors. What else do you need? Goodness as a concept is infinitely more appealing than perfection. It includes some dissonant tones and tensions, unlike the perfection that evidence-based research tends to promise us. A good room is not about optimal light, but it's about the play of light and shadow. It's not about optimal movement routes and convenience, but about journeying and pathways. It's not about optimal material performance, but calling attention to decay and patina. So, to conclude, I really agree with interpretations of the work of the Aaltos and of Van Hee as architectures of care. And I certainly applaud the amazing research that's being done on architectures of care by brilliant scholars today. But I do maintain that there's a real danger of care being constrained to evidence-based or more specifically data-driven guidelines all too easily, which bears the risk of resulting in reductivist understandings of both care and architecture. What the Aaltos and Van Hee tell us about care is that it's not only about the positive, but also the negative. Like human beings themselves, care is irreducible to technical maxims or best practice protocols that evidence-based research tends to privilege. True care acknowledges that everyday life comes in many shades. Humans are complex creatures who will sometimes wish to retreat and be alone. They'll sometimes feel melancholy, they'll feel moody rather than seek joy. Sometimes they'll need their homes to mourn a loss or illness rather than celebrate success. Sometimes they will even wish to feel inconvenience or hope to be challenged or even confronted by their surroundings. And it's in the alchemy of all these ingredients, both positive and negative, that the human being is truly and deeply cared for. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sophia. It's time to move forward to our Q&A session and discussion. So please, also, yes, now we can see your face as well. Thank you for both of you for your excellent lectures. I'm going to start with big question for Sam, actually. What thoughts did Sophia's theme of care evoke in you, if considering the connection to Marie-José's work?
I made lots of notes. Thank you for that question. I made lots of notes while Sophia was talking, and I was very much interested in this point of negative care, which is something new to me but sounds so familiar, having having worked alongside Marie-José for all those years. It's something that I'd like to look more into, and what I very much liked also in Sophia's presentation was the care with which she placed photographs of Alvar Aalto next to the work of our office, which I found, very striking, how the resemblances between those images, and the care with which you place those together. I mean, found those relationships. I don't know if that's an answer to the question of the person.
I think we are satisfied with that question, right, Sophia?
Thank you, Sam.
I would like to, this is for both of you. Both of the lectures showed sketches and sketching and drawing as a core of the whole design process. And as the sketches are those do differ if comparing Aalto's work or Marie-José's work. Could you a little bit open up what kind of meaning the sketching as part of the process have, and if these sketches and drawings, if they have similar functions or similar styles? How do you yourself read those sketches?
Maybe I can start talking about how Marie-José sees sketching. She has always said, well, there is an interest of certain people who collect architectural drawings and they see them as expressions of art, or they have an artistic value. But to her, she always laughs at this, as she thinks that the sketches are merely a tool to arrive at the building. And to her, this was very important, that the realization of the building. She has made, I talked about it in the lecture, I think 150 projects were not realized, or 150 projects were thought, that were conceived, drawn, that started to live their own life in her head, weren't realized. And this is for her, or has been for her, always like a somewhat of a frustration. I don't know if this is the right word, but I think it's in we're close to that. Yes, the importance is to realize, to build, to make space, and not so much to sketch it or to draw it. And in that sense, she didn't put too much attention to the sketches. Sophia.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. Without wishing to suggest that there's too much parallelism, I think there really are kind of shared foundations in terms of the unpreciousness of drawings, for sure. We could get into the nitty-gritty of how different the drawings look and feel. I think Marie-José's are darker. They're blacker in a very visual, immediate sense. They're somehow a bit more intense. All those tend to be a bit lighter, but nonetheless, they both share a kind of archaeological tenor. And I find it fascinating that both of drawing records have been associated or described in terms of kind of archaeological metaphors of digging in particular. There's a kind of insistence of needing to work something out in which process the drawing or the roll of trace is not a piece of art, and it's not precious, and it's not meant for presentation. It's simply a material trace of thinking, and above all, collaborative thinking in the case of the Aaltos. There's a kind of thrill that you can read in the drawing record. Some of the drawings are more than 3 meters long, and it's because the trace roll just kept flowing and flowing and flowing, and more ideas were coming, and they have no stable orientation because there would have been 4, 5, 6, 7 people drawing on the same roll of trace at the same time. And it's that thrill and that kind of that earnestness of saying this is not a piece of art, but this is a way of us figuring something else out that I think constitutes a shared foundation, if that makes sense.
I also think, if I can add to that, that for her, for Marie-José, the sketching is really about a passion, whatever the passion of design, and whatever she would have at hand. Like in the presentation, I also put an envelope. Whatever paper was at hand, she would use to sketch or to doodle or to write on. And it's this urge of producing, yeah.
Since we have had the pleasure, also both of you, of course, have visited the exhibition at Architecture and Design Museum, still open at the moment and continuing its tour to Jyväskylä Aalto 2 Museum Center. If thinking of the exhibition, I was listening to both of you and wrote down also many notes and words such as experimentation, play, intuition, also kind of unoptimal, imperfection, kind of these kind of words, which are in a way also in really nice way challenging thinking. And if thinking of the exhibition in hand, it has so much to do with and how to experience a space, or how to experience architecture by Marie-José Van Hee. What is important? It's more about kind of the experience itself. So I would like to ask both of you, if thinking of Alvar Aino Elissa Aalto's heritage, Marie-José Van Hee's work, how should we kind of approach their work as users of the space, or as curious minds trying to understand what kind of architecture is that? Do you have any advice on how to approach the work? Because I hear both of you kind of challenging the way of approaching architecture, maybe even.
Maybe I think if I understand your question well, if architecture is made well, it's very difficult to photograph. So if you and sometimes buildings that are not so good, but they have nice photographs, and then you go and visit them, and then you're disappointed. Often I hear the opposite, that people when they come and visit our office or the house of Marie-José, or they have visited some other building, it's the experience of the space that gives the extra, and that makes the architecture so good. Making exhibitions, of course, is something else, is something very temporary. But also here, I think imperfection, there is more possibilities to have imperfections. There's many things when we were developing this and the other exhibition that didn't go as planned as in real life, but that's okay. I think it's okay to leave things open, or to leave an accident, or to keep accidents or imperfections. I very much, when Sophia was talking about this negative care, I was thinking, for example, of Marie-José, who, when she has in her house the cupboards, the white and the green cupboards painted, she didn't have them painted by a painter. She had them painted by somebody who doesn't know how to paint, just so that there would be imperfections visible. You can't ask a painter, a professional painter, to paint something imperfect. So she had a friend of her paint it. So, and I think one can experience this not only in Marie-José's architecture, nor in the Aalto's or other architects' works. I think one can experience that everywhere in the city. There is this imperfection everywhere, and it's just maybe philosophy, but it's how you learn how to appreciate that, to celebrate the everyday, the theme of today's talk, right?
It's very well said. Do you want to add something, Sophia?
Yeah, I'm in full agreement with Sam, and going back to this question of, I mean, it's a daunting question, how to experience this architecture. I don't know. I don't have a guidebook, and I say this with the hypocrisy of a researcher, but it feels like a good step, particularly for someone perhaps visiting some of these buildings for the first time, is to suspend judgment and to resist the temptation to theorize and analyze at the outset, to just feel and to just walk and to just sit and to just be, kind of to be innocent and to be curious like a child, and to suspend that urge to try and make sense at all times. Because there's something about the temporal dimension in the shorter term, the play of light at different times of day or different seasons, and also the way in which the buildings age in the course of years and decades, which means that the buildings are never stable to begin with. So you somehow must get rid of the conception that you can figure it out and that there's an answer, and you have to surrender to a kind of bodily, very intuitive experience instead. These are like slippery bars of soap that always feel slightly different every time you visit. And every time you feel as though you have some understanding of the building, next time you go, it'll show a completely new side of itself to you, time and time again.
Yes, thank you so much. Now, this is for Sam. You both have many thank yous for wonderful lectures. I will just read this aloud. I would be interested to hear your thoughts on how Marie-José Van Hee would approach a new site or project. How did she begin? What did she draw first?
She would often go and visit the site with one of the project architects. And that would be like a visit, an informal visit to get to meet the client. And I think, I'm not sure, I'm not her. And she also kept on surprising us by constantly changing her approach and the way that she approached design and designed. But I think she would be at the site and then afterwards already maybe see what could change being at the site, but not sketch on the site. That would come afterwards when at home, at night. Especially at night, she would work at night, sometimes at the office until 9 and then continue working, because the next day she would come with drawings to the sometimes already the next day she would come to the office and stand next to us with the first sketch. This goes there, very general, very broad, and also these black sketches, as Sophia just mentioned. And this leaves a lot of possibility for change because they're very rough, they're not very precise. And because then she would also erase, I call that undrawing, with a moldable rubber. She would take out where it's too black, she would lighten that. So it's a negative drawing, you could say, to come back to negative care. And then these very thick lines, they could become spaces also. They could hold cupboards, they could have a toilet, or very thick insulated walls nowadays, because we can't have 20 centimeter walls, we need to have thick walls to protect from the cold and to conform with the regulations. So I would say sketching, but it doesn't happen on the site.
Yes, yes. And one more for Sophia. Lovely presentation from both of you, first of all. Thank you for your time and knowledge. Here is something about sentiment and your curation of photography, Sophia, really wonderful. When curating composition and photography is completed projects, how much consideration is given on the final presentation beyond just documenting?
I hope I'm understanding the question correctly. And I would say it's, in my view, what I just kind of shared with you all is almost a trace. It's a material or kind of digital trace rather than a roll of trace, rather than black archaeological drawing, but it's a trace of trying to think through discourses on care through these bodies of work. And where this comparison becomes really integral to the process, and this idea of composition and curation of really particularly chosen images is primarily in me trying to get to know the work of Van Hee better than I do. I have embodied lived experience and kind of deep familiarity with the Aalto projects, and it feels as though that's a mental library that I'm able to evoke at will. And so engaging deeply with the photography that was very kindly shared by Sam was instrumental in trying to understand and trying to extract or hypothesize where differences or similarities lie. And I'd like to give credit also to Sam in this process. We've gotten to know each other in preparation for this event, and we've kind of been playfully working with what we call diptychs as a method to try and understand these two practices, meaning simply two photographs next to one another of Aalto on one side and Van Hee on the other. And I'd like to think that the the presentation I just went through is perhaps not entirely polished in a traditional lecture sense, but it certainly testifies to the diptych method that we've been developing. So thanks to Sam for that. And thank you for the question.
It was wonderful to follow the storytelling you were both doing. We have here more Q&A questions collected, but unfortunately we are running out of time. So we really want to thank you for all the questions and for the time together. And I hope you understand we didn't have time to go through all the questions, but we've definitely enjoyed your talks and this discussion. And now I will hand over to Pilvi, who will end the event with closing words. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you very much. I hope you can all hear me. Now it's time for closing words, and we are running a few minutes behind the schedule, so I'm going to be very quick. Thank you very much, Sam and Sophia, for your insightful lectures and also the discussion, which could have been continued for a long time more. I'm truly inspired by your thoughtful and critical approach, which highlighted the subtleties of great architecture, reminding us that excellence is not always about the scale of the project. Thank you also to the audience. We had over 80 online attendees today at most, and in addition, there was a screening event at Aalto, at the Aalto 2 Museum Center in Jyväskylä, and as far as I understood, also architecture students across Finland and elsewhere were able to join. My warmest thanks also to our close collaborators, Alvar Aalto Foundation and Aalto 2 Museum Center. And of course, many thanks to the organizers, moderator Hanna, and my other colleague, producer Kaura Raudaskoski, who has been working behind the scenes today to make everything run so smoothly. So thank you very much. Before we close, just a few practical reminders still. The recording will be available for 1 week on museum website, and we'll update it there as soon as the recording is processed and ready. The link is also in the chat. And then we, of course, welcome your feedback on the session. Instructions are available also in the chat. And finally, I'd like to stop by inviting you to our upcoming exhibitions here in Helsinki at the Architecture and Design Museum. We are opening 2 exhibitions. The first one is exhibition Winner, Torille, very soon to be opened on October 3rd, and it reveals the architecture competition and winning plans for our museum's new building in South Harbour, Helsinki. And the exhibition is, the museum is set to open its doors in 2030. And on October 10th, we launch our new main exhibition, Escape to Moomin Valley, which is an exciting journey into how Tove Jansson perceived architecture and design in her life, and how these elements are reflected in the stories of Moomin Valley. This exhibition discusses actually several super acute themes of our global reality, like wicked problems. So it's much, much more than just another Moomin exhibition. So a warm welcome. On my behalf, thank you for attending and have a lovely September. See you around. Thank you.